is invoking massive shifts in the business value chains of existing and new age enterprises and is redefining what it takes to achieve a competitive advantage, scale, and long-term success. Now, achieving the level of customization, personalization, and operational efficiency necessary to compete in an increasingly fast-paced, pandemic-led environment in top of mind for nearly every business executive in any industry. By now, many recognize AI as a critical enabler in these pursuits. Enterprises have begun to envision a bold AI-powered future where AI is the underpinning and act as catalyst. The panel will ruminate on building a path to AI-led enterprise and will focus on how strategic building blocks for AI can help enterprises develop penetrating insights, intelligence, and recommendation. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is a panel discussion on Reimagine AI-led enterprise, the new code of success and scale. And the speakers to follow are really eminent, one after another, starting with Ambika Rajgopal, the Group Chief AI Officer, Michelin. Ambika is a seasoned and proven analytics and data science leader with a demonstrated professional record of leading companies to realize business impact from machine learning and AI at Sterlite Industries and Cummins Inc., with an aim to create business impact and guiding companies through mindset change, probabilistic understanding of risk, trust deficit, and new technologies to book this impact. Ambika has built high-performance analytics and AI teams by putting technical depth, trust, and customer empathy at the core of the team. So welcome it is to the Group Chief AI Officer, Michelin, Ambika Rajgopal. And our next speaker is the Director and Country Head Engineering Services, Siemens Digital Industry Software, Ajinkya B. Now, Ajinkya Bhave is the Director and Country Head India at Siemens Engineering Services, a part of the Digital Industry Software Business Unit, where he leads multiple teams in the areas of control systems and machine learning, multi-physics simulation, and computational fluid dynamics. He has a PhD in systems and control, an MS in robotics, and an MS in ECE, all from Carnegie Mellon University in the US. And at Siemens, is managing multiple R&D projects in the areas of autonomous driving, machine learning, and automotive control. He is also the recipient of the Siemens STS Innovation Award in 2019 for his contributions to innovations in machine learning across multiple applications. So please welcome Ajinkya Bhave. Our third speaker is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer, TVS Motor Group, Mahesh Kalavai. Now, Mahesh is currently the CDAO for TVS Motor and Group companies. He has more than 2 decades of experience in data sciences and engineering, having led several functions in companies such as Flower Corporation, Capital One, and Target. He has also been associated with startups and was instrumental in setting up the Target Startup Accelerator program. He's an engineering undergraduate and an MBA from University of California, Irvine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our third speaker, Mahesh Kalavai. And the fourth speaker is the Global Director, AI and Robotics, Schneider Electric, Madhu Hosadurga. Madhu is an expert in data science, robotics, analytics, and data engineering. Now, he has helped many Fortune 500 companies in setting up their strategy, roadmap, competency for digital transformation, and delivered multiple industrialized AI or ML and robotics solutions. So please welcome our fourth speaker, Madhu Hosadurga. And moderating this wonderful panel, ladies and gentlemen, is none other than the CEO of Affine, Manas Agrawal. Now, Manas is an AI evangelist, business builder, and entrepreneur at heart. And as the CEO of Affine, Manas is responsible for promoting client-first culture and ensuring Affine's sustainable growth through driving strategic, transformative, and impact-driven AI capabilities and solutions for global enterprises. Now, he works closely with CXOs from the largest gaming companies to the most reputed luxury car makers, manufacturing giants, and global technology behemoths, helping them define and execute transformation mandates, leveraging the trifecta of AI, data engineering, and cloud. Now, having spent his campus days at IIT Kharagpur and ISB Hyderabad and his professional stint with marquee organizations like IBM, Dell, and Accenture, he brings the best learning from both academia and industry. And at Affine, he continues to build on that to offer more to his clients. So without further ado, that's the moderator, Manas Agrawal. But let me remind the members of the panel, please note that you will be played an alert when there is just about 3 minutes before the end of your session time. Please quickly conclude and end it on time. The alert will sound something like this. Yeah, it'll sound something like this. So please pay attention. You'll have to be ready with that. And over to you, Manas Agrawal.
Hey, thanks, Riaz. I think, yourself and my two other predecessors, Anis and Sanjeev, have set up such a high energy stage. And with such a fantastic panel, I'm really dreadful of the buzzer going off, because this absolutely should be a rock star panel to listen into. And without further ado, let me dive into what I believe we could try and explore in the next 20-25 minutes that we have at hand. So Sanjeev started on a very interesting note about how he is witnessing, very legacy companies like, hospitals and cement manufacturing units, to startups and technology behemoths looking at AI as the next transformational toolkit. And Anis took us to a complete new journey of, how the pandemic has opened up new portal to the multiverse. So my first question to a very, very esteemed panel of mine, and a little more specifically to Ambika and Mahesh, would be, what kind of difference do you see, Ambika and Mahesh, on what is, how does the AI-led journey look for a company which is in legacy industries or in non-tech industries per se, vis-a-vis companies which are naturally AI first or technology driven? So, having been in this industry, having driven multiple large enterprise transformations, what difference do you see in these two approaches? Ambika, over to you.
Okay, so if you don't mind, Mahesh, I'll go first. So I think that's it's a interesting comparison to draw between companies that have sort of started off with technology first, technology in their DNA and AI. I mean, these are typically, sitting in 2021, these companies are not really even one could say new anymore. That they were, possibly you have companies that are 20, 30 years old that are still in this journey, and then you can contrast it with a company like Michelin, 130 years old, very, very strong history of innovation, of technology, but just not in the technology, not in the tech domain, so not in the as we now understand it, tech domain. And it's really interesting, what the transition looks like. I think first and foremost, it is one should look at it in the wider context of a digital transformation, which a lot of these companies, including Michelin, are undertaking and have undertaken for at least 6-7 years now, which is essentially from the thought process that it's imperative. It's an imperative to have data available. It's an imperative to have data-driven decision making, and this is not something that is entirely. This is not at all something that's an alien thought process, because of course you're talking about companies that are imbued with research, with technology in some form or the other. So, for example, at Michelin, of course, the entire R&D and manufacturing has a long history of mathematical modeling, of simulations, and so on. And where I think it really gets interesting is in a different kind of a thought process, which is really things like data governance, data ownership. That's where things making it actually come out of the silos that the data is really in, where one really now begins to look at not at samples of data, but actually data that is across factories, across machines, across parts of the group, through an entire section of the supply chain. This is where the thought process shift begins to happen, and of course we are in a stage where it is forget about it being an imperative driven by the boardroom. It is something that we all just demand. That's how we think now. And we keep looking at our children and saying, look how they think differently, but it's us as well. We just expect a different level of intelligence. We expect a different level of response, and almost, emotional kind of, empathy and response and knowledge, from the technology that we're interacting with. And our companies don't see it any differently. Employees within companies, with the systems that they have within companies, with the way that they are doing their work, the way they execute their work, this is the same expectation that there is. And the key, I think, to all of this is really for, where companies are really forward looking and have been forward-looking over their history and just are, making sure to catch what the new disruptive technologies are early. And the example that I like to give is that, if you look at business models that have truly disrupted entire industries, let's say in the last 20 years or so, you could talk about Uber and the cab industry. You could talk about Facebook and just how human beings interact with each other. You could talk about, of course, Google search. How we shop with Amazon. All of these would not have been possible without AI. So I think there's even traditional companies to companies that have been there for a while have this clear realization that transformational business models in the last 10, 15 years have been driven by AI. There is AI somewhere at the core of, from the outside, it looks like a transformational business model. There is a great deal of senior management support as a result of this. Of course, change management process doesn't look really different anywhere. Human beings are human beings. We all need to have very good reason to change the way that, we do things. And so that's how it is. But at a company like Michelin, I would say it's fairly easy, because we're just used to dealing with cutting edge technology, and it comes kind of easy. And that's been the journey.
Fantastic points, Ambika, and lots of learnings for all the viewers here. Mahesh, eager to listen into you.
Sure. Thanks, Manas. I'll piggyback on what Ambika said first, right? And for a lot of practitioners, yes, as we think of technology, right? So, and particularly in our field in data and AI, we think of algorithms and software. But industries that Ambika and I part of have a very rich tradition of technology and innovation. And oftentimes, those of us that have gone in the data and AI blood, including myself, right, before I joined this industry, we forget that technology far outdates and a lot more complex and sophisticated than the type of technology we talk about today, right? Ambika had a lot of great points. And Manas, I know you know that, right? But from an audience standpoint, I wanted to highlight that, and I want to come back at it at the end. If you look at a company such as ours, right? So we are, I'm part of TVS Motor and Group companies. We are in several industries. I will talk about the TVS Motor company, right? As an example, it's an automotive company, consumer-facing company. Clearly, there are some brick and mortar aspects to it, right? So we all go to a dealership even today to buy an automobile, right? And there is clearly manufacturing and supply chain. And they're absolutely brick and mortar, right? But there are several facets of what we do. They are as digital and data and AI first as any other consumer-facing company in any other industry, right? If you look at today, most of our traffic, right, people that are interested in buying our product, reaches digitally, right? They don't walk into a showroom, right? You can go to our website today and do e-commerce, right? So in that way, in terms of technology capability or sophistication, these companies are already there in a lot of aspects, right? But given the type of product that we sell, it's very natural that our consumers want to take a look at the product, ride the vehicle, feel it, and therefore there is a physical component. But even when you walk into a dealership, right, if you look at our dealership staff, their process is completely digitalized, right? They're having the most latest applications on their mobile phones. We have enabled augmented reality for our consumers on the dealership. It's as digital and AI first, right, as any other company. Another aspect to it are products themselves, right? So we have 4 connected vehicles that we have launched, right? One is an electric vehicle that is fully connected. We have recently launched a voice-enabled bike, right? A scooter in India. So products are digital and AI as well, right? So, and lastly, if you think of automobile, we closely associated industry is finance, right? Because for a lot of the consumers, it's still a product that they buy through finance. And if you look at a lot of our adjacent companies, we have our own financial services company as well, right? We are on cloud. We leverage the latest and greatest open source technologies. We are not wedded to any proprietary solutions. We leverage deep learning as much as any other fintech startup would do these days, right? So oftentimes when we think of these brick and mortar companies, we paint them with a broad brush, right? And I was one such as well. So in a lot of ways, when we talk about addressing, right, in the CXOs and boardrooms, as Ambika mentioned, we're already thinking digital. We're already digitalizing. We're already AI first in those aspects that are AI first, right? But change management is huge. Ambika talked about within the company change management. I will talk a little bit about another type of change management. Right? Again, if you look at a company such as ours, we have 5,000. We work with 5,000 small business that are dealerships in India, right, and a similar number abroad. We have several suppliers. Automotive is a very supply chain intensive business, right? So the change management is not just within the enterprise, but how do we construct it across the value chain? And lastly, it is for our own AI talent, right? Again, I'd request you to take a look at these industries, right? You'd be surprised that some of the most innovative AI work may be happening in industries that you've not looked at in closer detail. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. I think it's at people's own peril if they don't look at companies in these industries, Mahesh and Ambika, which have been which have been the innovation hub in different other technologies for ages, and completely agree with you. Turning over to Madhu and followed by Ajinkya as well. Now, when companies are moving on their AI-led journey to become the enterprise of tomorrow, how do they measure their journey? How on what metrics, along what benchmarks can they measure whether they are making the right kind of moves, achieving the right kind of objectives or not? So, Madhu, over to you, followed by Ajinkya. Some thoughts would be very helpful. Madhu, you are on mute. Madhu, I think you are still on mute.
You can hear me now?
Yes, fantastic. Go ahead, Madhu.
All right. So, Manas, first of all, I would like to tell you that, to the audience as well. See, AI definitely is a, horizontal technology. And it's agnostic of, any sector, including, manufacturing and many other sectors. See, when we talk about maturity, obviously, it varies from sector to sector and as well as within sector, organization to organization, right? So having said that, certain sectors definitely are at certain advantage when it comes to AI enablement compared to another sector. For example, if you look at banking, right? So this sector has been already IT enabled for decades, right? For them, enabling AI or empowering themselves AI is just a step away because they already have a digital footprint of everything what they do on a day-to-day basis, right? But on the other side, if you look at a set of sectors like manufacturing or logistics or supply chain, so they are very physical heavy, meaning they still have factories. For example, standard like organization, we run 250 factories, hundreds of distribution centers. For us, there is one more step we need to take before we can catch up with the digital world, which is we need to connect the physical world with the digital world. And obviously it's happening through the IoT and stuff like that, but there is a step which is in addition to the digital sector, right? So how do we measure the digital maturity? So again, there's no standard, but the way we measure at Schneider is we are basically having a vision to make our all operations completely autonomous. Meaning, see, today you have self-driving cars, right? So the question we ask ourselves is, if cars can drive themselves, why not our operations, right? Because imagine a car, if it can drive itself, I mean, that's the most complex situation you can imagine. Look at all the external parameters, situations, circumstances when a car is moving in a road, right? So I'm pretty sure our operations are not as complex as what a self-driving car has to go through. So given that that's our vision, right? But are we there? Probably no. Okay. So if I have to give you a certain maturity metrics, I would first say, are you BI enabled? That's like the maturity one, where at least you have the data of how you perform. And then the second step, I would say, are you able to foresee the future, right? And the third step, I would say, are you able to make your operations autonomous or automatic, right? In fact, see, Schneider is a leader in the industry automation. In fact, that's what we do also. We enable our customers automate their operations, right? So it's both internal as well as external for us. So that's about how we measure maturity and how AI is being applied, right? So over to you, Manas.
Thanks, Madhu. Very interesting perspectives. I think you're eager to listen into you.
Sure. Thanks, Manas. So I think from the Siemens point of view, we do a lot of work with customers to get AI into their sort of culture and tool chain. And as was said before, different domains have different ways of measuring the maturity of AI adoption. So I don't have a detailed list which we typically have with process audits at customers, but a set of points we always look at in general across domains, across industries. We always start with data. We see if the data in that company or the enterprise, is it centralized? Is it available across all the intercompany silos, for example? Is it digitizable? And even if it is it labelable? Because that's a big part of using it for any kind of training and machine learning. Is it cleanable and is it interpretable? So data forms the core of the flow and the next steps for AI adoption. So that's the first thing we look at. After that, we also look at a high level, and there are metrics to gauge for each domain separately. Where and when is AI being applied at all points in the workflow? And is it being applied at points where it's actually relevant and making an impact? Or is it being applied just because it happens to be a tool that people want to use? So there's a difference between applying it just because it's there and applying it because it actually gives you a return on investment. We've seen customers applying it because it's sort of the done thing to do, but it doesn't really help. So that's two things, data and then the application of AI. The third thing we typically measure in terms of AI maturity is what's the ratio of the models that company is deploying in production versus the models that they're training. And that's an important benchmark because there are many customers and companies where they do a lot of in-house training of models, testing out things, but it remains in the research lab. It doesn't ever go out where it's actually useful for their own processes and employees or for their own customers. So this ratio of deployed models to research or trainable models is an important metric we should look at. Other than that, increasingly, we are looking at the whole ML ops picture, right? So where and when does the machine learning ops come into their process? Is it applied at all stages? And that's where typically what we say as AI training, that's what people think about, which is training your models, getting data, labeling your data, cloud computing, deployment infrastructure. But the core is the ML ops framework. Is it being actually applied when you're creating your AI at all stages? And lastly, it's a subjective thing, but we also look at how the AI culture is, and is it prevalent in that company across teams and individuals? And when I talk about an AI culture, what I mean is, are you thinking about where AI can be useful and integrated in each person's day-to-day or routine tasks? If that culture is prevalent or it's being encouraged by upper management and by the team leaders, then there are chances that you see loopholes in your process where AI actually can be made more relevant because the people who are working in that field will tell you whether that is amenable to AI integration or not. So that's how we typically look at maturity. I mean, it's a very non-technical way of saying it, but like I said, these are typical benchmarks we look at, along with, of course, quantifiable metrics based on the domain.
Fantastic, absolutely interesting perspective, Ajinkya. And I think the cultural aspect that you talked about is really something that needs deep thinking, because that's where the rubber meets the road. So, in fact, taking a segue from that question or that perspective that you shared, Ajinkya and Madhu, over to Ambika again. Ambika, you have led multiple large enterprise transformations in very, very large, complex setups. What are some of the best practices that you would like to share with the audience on how they can think around their enterprise being AI enabled?
Yeah, so I think if I was to so if I was to pick one, it would really be nothing succeeds like success. And it's easy to say, but and I am reiterating Ajinkya's metric. Ultimately get it into production. And have that really as front and center. While it might sound flippant and and very obvious, in fact I have found that it's not just a good a really good guideline and a metric for you to have to for the AI practice overall. It in fact is a great metric and a point of view to have even within the the scope of a project, right from the start, to look at the project, whatever it is, even if it's a POC, if it is something that you're just thinking about, something that you're just playing with, to really begin to instill the discipline in the teams to think about it as what is this going to look like? What is the eventual business process going to look like when this particular application is in production? To think of it as a software application, software product that's actually going to change the way that somebody does business. And to me, if I was to pick one, I think this thought process and instilling this thought process and this discipline throughout is enormously valuable, because essentially it trains the team and it trains the entire. And when I say team, I mean this includes business stakeholders, really everybody that's involved in a particular project, to begin to really think about it, to have a way to make decisions around it. When do we stop? When do we start? Where are we going? What are we doing? Are we accurate enough? Is this realistic? What gives a very, very good way to actually take a lens through which to take all of these decisions. The second thing I would say is communicate and over communicate, and this is really focused at the, let's say, at the leadership layer. A lot of us, I think, in this room, certainly, I think everybody on this panel, we come from a technical background. I mean, we have, so our instinct tends to be, our teams tend to be introverted. Our instinct tends to be to really prove rather than talk. And I think it's at least for me, it's a journey. It's been a journey, but a very, very critical one. And I would really a piece of advice really, if I was that's what you asked me, Manas, to give is to then to get past it, to essentially find a way, communicate, over communicate. Just because human, it's a complex topic. AI is a complex topic, irrespective of however we would like to place ourselves. We are evangelists. We are forerunners of a technology that is yet to come into its goal. It's something that people are not entirely comfortable with, and human communication is lossy. It's a lossy process. So you have to reiterate. So communicate, over communicate. Communicate the vision, communicate the successes, communicate why POCs were stopped, why POCs were started. So those really would be the and of course keep your folks happy.
Fantastic thoughts. Fantastic thoughts. Mahesh, over to you. And words of wisdom, Mahesh.
Manas?
Mahesh, some words of wisdom from you on how some of the best practices you believe could help the audience.
Sure. Right. So I can talk about a few things that we do in terms of best practices. Right. Again, I'll piggyback on what Ambika said. Right. So from a strategy standpoint, it's square and center. We start at the boardroom, understand how AI can improve our current business models, but also how does it help us propel into future worlds. Right. So that's one key aspect. Second, think what of either Madhu, I think mentioned this, right? Importance of understanding data practices and shoring that up is another key aspect, and ultimately that's a raw material, right? So how do we manage data? How do we govern it? How do we put that to good use? Is a key aspect, all the way leading to deploying our algorithms in production. Ultimately, the proof is in the pudding, right? So that is absolutely key. Capability building is huge. Oftentimes when you think about capability building, we talk about producers of AI, so data scientists and data engineers. Equal attention has to be given to other contributors to AI, right? Folks that gather data, folks that work with data, ensure the data is clean data, consumers of AI solutions, sponsors of projects. Capability building is very extensive. We need to think about that. Thinking about the sort of algorithms where you want human-in-the-loop algorithms, where you want to have standalone AI algorithms is another key aspect of capability building and maturity. And lastly, right, tie AI to the business goals of this year, of your company, right? It could be about consumer experience, top line growth, bottom line growth, and that ensures that there is attention throughout the organization. So these are some of the things that we look at. Thanks, Manas.
Fantastic. And unfortunately, Riaz has already pressed the buzzer a few seconds back, but I would definitely, I'm very, very keen to listen to last one statement from each of you. What does the future hold for us? Maybe just quick 10-15 seconds from each of you. Azinkya, maybe you can share your thoughts. What does the future hold for us?
Sure. So I would say instead of talking about a future of AI-led enterprise, I always think of it as a future where it's AI-guided enterprise, where it's more of human-machine collaboration, which becomes more intertwined and common. I don't think AI is ever going to replace the human factor. That's my personal opinion. I do believe AI can enhance and make us more efficient. And that's where I think as AI gets adopted more into the industry, into practices, we'll take it as an equal partner and as a presence which is almost everywhere. Not fight with it, but own it and work with it. I think that's where I see the future of where AI would come in enterprises.
Fantastic thought. Own it, work with it. Point well taken. Ambika, over to you.
I think to just keep it very short, I would say that it's really where AI becomes like just an extension to the way that we deeply look into processes. And it just becomes a standard part of the toolkit through which we understand any and all processes that that we perform. That's how I look at it.
Thank you. Make it standard part of the toolkit. Fantastic thought. Madhu, over to you. Madhu, I think you are on mute. If you,
as usual, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So in my view, the future is going to be self-driving organizations. I mean, I talked about it, leveraging not just AI, because AI is going to be only a small piece of the puzzle. I think we need to look at all digital technologies holistically. For example, how do I embed AI into smart contracts in blockchain? How do I leverage robotic process automation and AI together for cognitive automation? So in my view, bring all this together, let organizations run on their own, at least the operations, if not strategic stuff, right? So that way we can use human beings, what they are good at, to create new stuff, and let the operations be run by the machines, right? So that's in my view is the future.
Fantastic. And Mahesh, over to you for the concluding remarks, please.
Sure. One common theme that you see from this panel, right? So we are from engineering-rich industries, engineering of a different kind, industries, and you heard from all of us, right, on how we are all transforming. These industries are transforming with AI, and so the corollary, therefore, is our societies, right, will completely be transformed with AI. We will be consumers of companies such as ours, right? And so will our nation and countries such as ours. So we can be both great producers of AI, but also big beneficiaries of it. So let's embrace the change, folks.
Fantastic. So let's embrace the change. And on that note, I want to thank you, everyone. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to all the viewers. I'm sure each of us would have absorbed a lot of words of wisdom coming from you all. Very interesting theme on which I would want to close here, that while we are talking AI, we are talking technology, but I hear it from all my esteemed guests here that people are at the center of it, be it in terms of the capabilities or people who will consume it, be change management being the key theme of how to transform, or be it in terms of keeping it as a partnership of AI and human beings. So on that note, thank you everyone once again, and looking forward to many more discussions on this event. Over to you, Riaz.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Manas, and thank you to all the panelists. Thank you so much for adding a lot of value today to all of the viewers and listeners right here. And